The grand ballroom of the Wellington Hotel was alive with energy that evening. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a warm golden glow over hundreds of guests dressed in their finest clothes. Women wore elegant gowns that sparkled under the lights. Men adjusted their ties and sipped champagne from tall glasses. It was the kind of event where people came to be seen, where business deals happened over appetizers, and where the air itself seemed to smell like money and perfume. This was the annual Heart of Hope Charity Gala, one of the most prestigious fundraising events in the city. Every year, the wealthiest families, business owners, and celebrities gathered here to donate money for children's hospitals. But let's be honest, for many of them, it was also a chance to show off, to network, to post pictures on social media and feel good about themselves. In the center of the room, a beautiful grand piano sat on a small stage. A young man in a black suit was playing soft jazz music, his fingers dancing across the keys. He was good, no doubt about it. The kind of musician you hire for events like this. Professional, polished, but nothing that would make you stop and stare. His music blended into the background, mixing with the sound of clinking glasses and polite laughter. Now, among all these important people, there was one woman who didn't quite fit in. She sat alone at a table near the back corner of the room, far from the spotlight. She looked to be in her mid-60s, with silver hair pulled back in a simple bun. Her dress was nice but plain. Navy blue, no sparkles, no designer label. While everyone else was busy greeting each other and taking selfies, she just sat there quietly, watching the room with calm, curious eyes. Her name doesn't matter right now. What matters is that nobody paid any attention to her. She was invisible in that crowd. Just another face. Maybe someone's grandmother. Maybe a plus one who got lost. A few people glanced her way and then looked right through her, the way you might look past a piece of furniture. She didn't seem to mind. In fact, she seemed perfectly comfortable being ignored. There was something peaceful about her, like she had nothing to prove to anyone. She held a glass of sparkling water in her hand and watched the pianist on stage with a small, knowing smile on her face. At one point, a young waiter came by her table to refill her water. He was probably in his early 20s, working his way through college, trying to earn some extra cash on a Friday night. He had kind eyes and a friendly smile. "Beautiful music, isn't it?" he said, nodding toward the stage. The woman looked up at him and smiled warmly. "Yes, it is. He's quite talented. Do you play?" The waiter asked, just making conversation. He didn't expect much of an answer. It was the kind of question you asked to fill the silence. The woman laughed softly. It was a gentle laugh, not loud or attention-seeking. "Oh, I dabble a little," she said. "But I'm not very good. Just a hobby, really." The waiter nodded politely. "That's nice. I always wished I could play an instrument. Never had the patience for it, though." "It's never too late to learn," she said kindly. "Music has a way of finding people when they need it most." He smiled at her, thanked her, and moved on to the next table. He didn't think about the conversation again. Why would he? She was just a sweet older lady being humble about a little hobby. Nothing special. But here's the thing. That woman was lying. Or rather, she was being modest to a degree that was almost ridiculous. Because what nobody in that room knew, what nobody even suspected, was that this quiet woman sitting alone in the corner was one of the most celebrated pianists in the world. She had performed on the greatest stages across Europe, Asia, and America. She had played for presidents, prime ministers, and royalty. Critics had called her a once-in-a-generation talent. Her recordings had sold millions of copies. Music students around the world studied her technique like it was sacred. And yet, here she was, sitting unnoticed at a charity event, telling a waiter she wasn't very good. Why was she even there? That's a fair question. The truth is, She had been invited by an old friend who sat on the charities board. They had grown up together decades ago, back when neither of them had money or fancy titles. Her friend had asked her to come as a personal favor, nothing more. No performance, no spotlight, just a night out to support a good cause and catch up over dinner. She had agreed, but only on one condition. She didn't want anyone to know who she was. No announcements, no introductions. She just wanted to be a regular guest for once, to enjoy an evening without people staring at her, asking for autographs, or treating her like she was made of glass. Her friend had laughed and said, "You know, most celebrities want the opposite." And she had replied, "I've had enough attention for one lifetime. Tonight I just want to eat cake and people watch." So that's exactly what she did. She sat at her quiet table, nibbled on fancy appetizers, and watched the show unfold around her. She saw the wealthy donors writing big checks and posing for photos. She saw young couples dancing awkwardly near the stage. She saw an older man spill wine on his shirt and pretend it didn't happen. And through it all, she listened to the music. The young pianist on stage was playing a smooth jazz number now. He was technically skilled, hitting all the right notes at all the right times. But something was missing. The music was correct, but it didn't have soul. It didn't reach out and grab you by the heart. It was like a beautiful painting that someone had copied perfectly, but without understanding why the original was special. She didn't judge him for it. He was young. He was still learning. Soul wasn't something you could teach. It came from life, from pain, from joy, from years of falling in love with music so deeply that it became part of your blood. She had learned that the hard way, a long time ago. As she sat there lost in thought, a woman at a nearby table caught her eye. She was probably in her 40s, dressed in a bright red gown, talking loudly about her latest vacation to some tropical island. Her voice carried across the room like she wanted everyone to hear. At one point, she looked over at the older woman sitting alone and gave her a quick, dismissive glance. The kind of look that said, "Who invited you?" The older woman just smiled and looked away. She had dealt with people like that her whole life. People who judged others by their clothes, their status, their appearance. She had learned long ago that the loudest people in the room were rarely the most interesting. She finished her sparkling water and checked her watch. The evening was still young. Her friend hadn't arrived yet, stuck in traffic from the airport. So she had time to kill. She had no idea that in less than an hour, her quiet evening was about to take a dramatic turn. She had no idea that fate, or maybe just bad luck, was about to push her into the spotlight whether she wanted it or not. And she certainly had no idea that by the end of the night, every single person in that room would know exactly who she was. But for now, she just sat there in the corner, invisible and content, watching the world spin around her. Sometimes, the most extraordinary people are the ones you least expect. About 45 minutes into the evening, something unexpected happened. The young pianist on stage had been playing beautifully, working his way through another smooth jazz piece, when suddenly he stopped. His hands froze over the keys. His face went pale, and he grabbed his stomach like something was very wrong. A few people near the stage noticed first. Then more heads turned. The music had stopped, and in a room full of chatter, that sudden silence was louder than any sound. The pianist stood up slowly, swaying a little on his feet. He looked dizzy, unsteady. One of the event staff rushed over to him, and he whispered something in her ear. She nodded quickly and helped him off the stage, guiding him toward a back door. Whispers spread through the crowd like wildfire. What happened? Is he okay? Did he faint? Within minutes, the event coordinator, a tall woman in a sleek black dress, was pacing near the stage with her phone pressed to her ear. Her face was tight with stress. You could tell she was trying to stay calm, but her eyes told a different story. This was a disaster waiting to happen. The truth came out quickly. The pianist had eaten something that didn't agree with him. Food poisoning, most likely. He was in the bathroom, too sick to continue. There was no way he could perform for the rest of the night. They had called for a car to take him home. Now, this might not seem like a huge deal. So what if there's no music for a while? People can still talk and enjoy themselves, right? But here's the thing. The silent auction was scheduled to start in just 20 minutes. This was the main event of the evening, the moment when wealthy donors would bid on expensive items to raise money for the children's hospital. And the organizers had planned everything around live piano music. Soft, elegant background music that would set the mood, keep the energy flowing, and encourage people to open their wallets. Without music, the auction would feel flat, awkward, like a party where someone forgot to turn on the playlist. And for an event that was expected to raise hundreds of thousands of dollars, that kind of awkwardness could cost them big. The event coordinator gathered her team in a corner and spoke in a harsh whisper. "We need a solution. Now, does anyone know another pianist we can call?" Her assistant scrolled through his phone desperately. "Everyone I know is booked tonight. There's a jazz festival across town. I can try calling around, but it'll take at least an hour to get someone here." "We don't have an hour," the coordinator snapped. "The auction starts in 20 minutes. Meanwhile, at her quiet table in the corner, the older woman watched all of this unfold. She could see the panic on the coordinator's face. She could see the staff members running around like ants whose hill had been kicked over. And she felt a small twinge of sympathy for them. She knew what it was like to have things go wrong at the worst possible moment, but she stayed in her seat. This wasn't her problem. She was just a guest tonight, an invisible guest who wanted nothing more than to enjoy her evening in peace. A few minutes later, the event coordinator made a decision. She walked up to the stage, grabbed the microphone, and tapped it twice to get everyone's attention. The chatter in the room slowly died down as hundreds of faces turned toward her. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The kind of smile you put on when you're panicking inside, but trying to hold it together. "Good evening, everyone," she said, her voice bright and cheerful. "I hope you're all having a wonderful time tonight. I wanted to give you a quick update. Unfortunately, our talented pianist has fallen ill and had to leave early. We wish him a speedy recovery." A murmur of concern rippled through the crowd. "Now," she continued, "we have a small favor to ask. Our silent auction is about to begin, and we would love to have some live music to keep the evening magical. So I'm wondering, is there anyone here tonight who plays the piano? Anyone at all who might be willing to help us out for just a little while?" She laughed nervously, trying to make it sound like a fun, spontaneous moment. But you could hear the desperation underneath. The room went quiet. People looked around at each other. A few nervous chuckles broke out. Someone in the back made a joke about only knowing how to play chopsticks. More laughter, but no volunteers. Seconds ticked by. The coordinator's smile started to falter, and then something happened that would change the course of the entire evening. At a table not far from the older woman, a chatty socialite in a bright red gown suddenly turned around. This was the same woman who had given the older lady that dismissive look earlier. She had been drinking champagne all night and was feeling bold. "Wait a minute," she said loudly, pointing a manicured finger at the older woman. Didn't you say earlier that you played piano?" The older woman blinked, caught off guard. Every head in the nearby area turned toward her. "I'm sorry?" she said softly. "I heard you talking to the waiter," the socialite continued, her voice carrying across the room. "You said you played a little. Come on, don't be shy." The older woman shook her head gently, a humble smile on her face. "Oh no, I really don't think I'm what they're looking for." I just dabble. It's nothing serious. But the socialite wasn't giving up. She had found a solution to the problem, and she wanted everyone to know it. Come on, it's for charity. You don't have to be perfect. Just play something simple. Anything is better than silence, right? A few other guests started nodding and murmuring in agreement. Someone even started clapping, trying to encourage her. The attention in the room was shifting, and suddenly all eyes were on the quiet woman in the corner. The event coordinator saw an opportunity and grabbed it. She walked over with the microphone, her smile now wide and hopeful. "Ma'am, would you be willing to help us out? Even just for a few songs? We would be so grateful." The older woman looked around the room. She saw the expectant faces. She saw the desperate coordinator. She saw the socialite grinning smugly, proud of herself for finding a volunteer. For a moment, she said nothing. Her mind was racing. She had promised herself a quiet night. No spotlight. No attention. Just cake and people watching, remember? This was exactly the kind of situation she had been trying to avoid. But then she thought about the children's hospital. She thought about all the kids who would benefit from the money raised tonight. She thought about how something as simple as background music could help loosen wallets and open hearts. And she thought about her old friend, the one who had invited her, who had dedicated years of her life to this charity. How would it look if she just sat there and refused to help? She sighed quietly. "I suppose I could try," she said softly. "But please, don't expect too much. I'm really quite rusty." The coordinator's face lit up like a Christmas tree. "Thank you so much. You're a lifesaver." The socialite clapped her hands together triumphantly. "See? I knew she'd do it." "You're welcome, everyone." A few people chuckled. A polite round of applause scattered through the room. The kind of applause you give someone for being a good sport, not because you expect anything impressive. The older woman stood up slowly from her chair. She smoothed down her simple navy dress and took a deep breath as she began walking toward the stage. She could feel the eyes on her. She could hear the whispers. Who is she? Probably just someone's grandmother. Well, at least it's something. Nobody expected much. Why would they? She was just a random old lady who said she dabbled. At best, they were hoping for some simple background noise. A few easy tunes to fill the silence until the real entertainment could be arranged. They had no idea what was about to happen. She reached the stage and looked at the grand piano sitting there under the lights. It was a beautiful instrument. A Steinway, if she wasn't mistaken. She ran her fingers lightly along its polished surface, and something stirred inside her. Something old and familiar. She sat down on the bench, adjusted her position, and placed her hands gently on the keys. The room buzzed with low conversation. People had already gone back to their drinks and their gossip. Nobody was really paying attention anymore. That was about to change. She sat there for a moment, perfectly still. Her hands rested on the keys, but she didn't press them. Not yet. She just breathed, slowly and deeply, like she was preparing for something important. To everyone watching, it probably looked like nerves. Like she was scared. And honestly, a few people felt a little embarrassed for her. Here was this random older woman, clearly out of her element, sitting at a grand piano in front of hundreds of strangers. Some guests exchanged awkward glances. Others turned away, not wanting to watch what they assumed would be a painful performance. The socialite in the red dress whispered to her friend, "I hope she at least knows a full song." This could get uncomfortable. But something interesting was happening that nobody noticed. The woman wasn't nervous at all. That stillness, that quiet breath, wasn't fear. It was ritual. It was the same thing she had done before every performance for the past 50 years. A moment of silence before the storm. A conversation between her soul and the instrument. She closed her eyes briefly. and memories flooded through her mind. She remembered being 5 years old, sitting on a wooden bench in her grandmother's tiny apartment, reaching up to touch piano keys that seemed impossibly large. She remembered her grandmother's wrinkled hands guiding hers, teaching her the first simple melody she ever learned. She remembered the joy of making music, even back then, the way it made her feel alive. She remembered being 12, practicing for hours every day while other kids played outside. She remembered the calluses on her fingers, the aching muscles in her back, the tears of frustration when she couldn't get a passage right. And she remembered the moment when it all clicked, when her hands finally understood what her heart was trying to say. She remembered her first real concert. At 16, in a small church hall with maybe 50 people in the audience. She had been terrified that night. Her hands had trembled. But the moment she touched the keys, everything else had disappeared. There was only the music dot, and now, decades later, here she was again. Different stage. Different audience. Same feeling. She opened her eyes and looked at the piano. It really was a beautiful Steinway. She had played hundreds of pianos in her life, maybe thousands, but each one was unique. Each one had its own voice, its own personality. You had to listen before you could speak. She pressed a single key. Just one note. A soft, clear tone floated through the air. A few heads turned, but most people ignored it. They were still busy with their conversations, their champagne, their gossip. She pressed another key. Then another. Simple notes, spaced apart, like she was testing the waters. Feeling out the instrument. Getting to know it. The event coordinator, standing near the stage, watched with a polite but worried smile. She was hoping for something decent. Something that wouldn't embarrass the charity. At this point, she would settle for a basic rendition of some classic tune. Anything to fill the silence until the auction started. The older woman played a few more notes, forming the beginning of a simple melody. It was soft, almost hesitant. The kind of playing you might hear from a beginner working through their first lesson book. The socialite smirked and leaned toward her friend. Told you. She's probably going to play Mary Had a Little Lamb or something. But then something shifted. The simple melody began to grow. The notes came faster now, more confident. What had started as a gentle trickle became a steady stream. The woman's fingers moved with increasing purpose, weaving the simple tune into something more complex, more layered. A few more heads turned. The melody evolved again, climbing higher, adding depth and richness. It was like watching a flower bloom in fast motion. What had seemed ordinary moments ago was becoming something else entirely. Something unexpected. The event coordinator's polite smile faded, replaced by a look of genuine surprise. She stepped closer to the stage, her eyes fixed on the woman's hands. And then, without warning, the woman launched into something completely different. Her fingers exploded across the keyboard in a cascade of notes, so fast and so precise that it seemed almost impossible. The sound filled the room like a wave crashing against the shore. It was powerful. It was powerful. It was passionate. It was absolutely breathtaking. The chatter in the room began to die. One conversation at a time, people stopped talking. Glasses paused halfway to lips. Forks froze over plates. Heads turned toward the stage, confusion and wonder spreading across faces. What was happening? Who was this woman? She was playing a classical piece now, something intricate and demanding. Her hands danced across the keys with a speed and grace that defied belief. Every note was perfect. Every phrase was shaped with intention and emotion. This wasn't just playing. This was art. The socialite's smug expression melted away. Her mouth fell open slightly, and she stared at the stage like she was seeing a ghost. Near the back of the room, the young waiter who had spoken to the woman earlier stood frozen with a tray in his hands. He remembered their conversation. She had said she dabbled. She had said she wasn't very good. He shook his head slowly, unable to process what he was witnessing. The music built and built, climbing toward an emotional peak. There were moments of thundering power that made the chandeliers tremble. There were moments of delicate softness that brought tears to people's eyes. And through it all, the woman sat at the piano with perfect calm, her eyes half closed, completely lost in the music. She wasn't performing for the audience anymore. She wasn't even aware of them. She was somewhere else entirely. Somewhere between memory and dream, between past and present. The piano had become an extension of her body, and the music was flowing through her like blood through veins. Woman near the front of the room felt tears streaming down her cheeks. She didn't know why. She wasn't even a fan of classical music. But something about the way this woman played reached inside her and touched something deep. A businessman who had been checking his phone all evening put it away and stared at the stage. For the first time that night, he forgot about work, about deals, about money. He just listened. A teenage girl who had been dragged to the event by her parents sat up straight in her chair. She had never heard anything like this. She didn't know music could sound this way. She didn't know it could make her feel this way. The piece reached its climax, a glorious explosion of sound and emotion. And then it began to soften, slowly winding down like a gentle exhale after a long breath. The final notes hung in the air, delicate and pure, before fading into silence. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The room was frozen in a kind of collective shock. The woman lifted her hands from the keys and placed them quietly in her lap. She took a slow breath and opened her eyes fully, as if waking from a dream dot, and then she noticed the silence. She looked out at the room and saw hundreds of faces staring back at her. Eyes wide, mouths open. Some people had tears on their cheeks. Others looked like they had just witnessed something impossible. The socialite in the red dress was gripping her friend's arm so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Her expression was a mixture of shock and embarrassment. She had been so sure this woman was nobody. She had been so confident in her judgment. She had been so completely wrong. The event coordinator stood at the edge of the stage, one hand pressed against her chest, her eyes glistening. She had organized dozens of these events over the years. She had seen celebrities perform. She had heard professional musicians play. But she had never experienced anything quite like this. Near the bar, a man quietly pulled out his phone. He wasn't trying to record the performance. It was already over. Instead, he opened a search engine and typed a few words, trying to figure out who this mysterious woman could possibly be. It only took him a few seconds to find the answer. And when he did, his face went pale. He turned to the person next to him and showed them the screen. Their eyes went wide. They showed the next person, then the next. A ripple of recognition began spreading through the crowd, moving from table to table like a wave. Whispers filled the air. Shocked whispers. Disbelieving whispers. Is that really her? It can't be. Oh my God, it's actually her. The woman at the piano noticed the commotion. She saw the phones coming out. She saw the pointing fingers and the stunned expressions. And she realized, with a quiet sigh, that her peaceful evening was officially over. Her secret was out. The whispers grew louder. Phones were being passed from hand to hand. People who had been sitting down were now standing, craning their necks to get a better look at the woman on stage. The energy in the room had completely transformed. What had been a polite, somewhat boring charity event had suddenly become something electric. The man who had first searched her name was now showing his phone to anyone who would look. On the screen was a photograph from a magazine article, taken maybe 10 years ago. The woman in the photo was younger, dressed in a stunning concert gown, standing beside a grand piano on a world-famous stage. but the face was unmistakable. The same calm eyes, the same gentle smile. It was definitely her. "She's performed at Carnegie Hall," someone said in a hushed voice. "Multiple times. I read she played for 3 different presidents," another person added. "My mother has all her albums. Every single one. She's going to lose her mind when I tell her about this." The information spread like fire through dry grass. Within minutes, almost everyone in the room knew who was sitting at that piano. This wasn't some random grandmother who dabbled in music. This was a living legend, a world-renowned concert pianist, whose name was spoken with reverence in music circles around the globe. And she had just performed for them, for free, at a charity gala. After telling a waiter she wasn't very good, the socialite in the red dress looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. Her face had gone from smug to shocked to deeply embarrassed. She remembered how she had pointed at this woman and practically forced her to volunteer. She remembered thinking she was doing everyone a favor by finding some amateur to fill the silence. The memory made her cringe. Her friend leaned over and whispered, "Well, you really know how to pick them." The socialite didn't respond. She just stared at the stage, her champagne glass forgotten in her hand. Meanwhile, the woman at the piano remained remarkably calm. She could feel the shift in the room. She could see the recognition dawning on people's faces. But she didn't run. She didn't hide. She simply sat there, her hands resting quietly in her lap, waiting for the storm to pass. The event coordinator was the first to approach her. She walked up to the stage slowly, almost reverently, like she was approaching royalty. Her eyes were still glistening from the performance. "I don't even know what to say," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I had no idea. We had no idea. That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." The woman smiled warmly. "Thank you. It's been a while since I played for an audience. I wasn't sure I still had it in me." The coordinator laughed, a little breathlessly. "Still had it in you? Ma'am, with all due respect, I think you just gave everyone in this room a core memory. People are going to talk about this night for years." More people were gathering near the stage now. Some kept a respectful distance, too shy to approach. Others moved closer, their faces full of wonder and curiosity. A few had their phones out, hoping to capture a photo. An older gentleman in a perfectly tailored suit stepped forward. He had the look of someone important, the kind of person who was used to being in charge. But right now, he looked humbled. "Excuse me," he said softly. "I just wanted to say that my wife passed away 3 years ago. She loved your music more than anything. She played your recordings every single day. Hearing you play tonight," he paused, his voice catching. "It felt like she was here with me again. Thank you for that." The woman's eyes softened. She reached out and took his hand gently. "I'm so sorry for your loss. Music has a way of keeping the people we love close to us. I'm honored that my playing could bring you some comfort." The man nodded, unable to speak, and stepped back into the crowd. A young woman, probably in her mid-20s, came forward next. She was practically vibrating with excitement, but trying very hard to stay composed. "I'm so sorry to bother you," she said quickly, "but I just have to tell you. I'm a music student, piano. I've studied your recordings for years. The way you phrase choppin', the way you build tension and release. It changed everything for me. You're the reason I decided to pursue music professionally." The older woman's face lit up with genuine warmth. "That means more to me than you know. The greatest gift any musician can receive is knowing their work inspired someone else to follow the path. Keep playing, dear. Keep practicing. And most importantly, keep listening to what the music is trying to tell you." The young student nodded eagerly, tears forming in her eyes. "I will, I promise." As more people approached, offering compliments and asking questions, something beautiful began to happen. The stiffness of the fancy gala started to melt away. People who had been strangers minutes ago were now talking to each other, bonded by the shared experience of what they had just witnessed. The usual barriers of wealth and status seemed to fade. For a moment, everyone in the room was simply human, connected by the power of music. The event coordinator, sensing the magic of the moment, stepped forward again. She still had the microphone in her hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice filled with emotion, "I think I speak for everyone when I say that was absolutely extraordinary. We are so incredibly honored to have this amazing artist with us tonight." The room erupted in applause. Real applause this time. Not the polite clapping from earlier. This was loud, enthusiastic, heartfelt. People were cheering. Some were wiping tears from their eyes. The woman at the piano raised her hand modestly, acknowledging the appreciation with grace. She wasn't used to this kind of attention anymore. After decades in the spotlight, she had stepped back from public performances several years ago. She had told herself she was done with stages and audiences. But sitting here now, feeling the warmth of the crowd's response, something stirred inside her. Something she thought she had left behind long ago. The coordinator leaned toward her, lowering the microphone. "Would you consider playing something else? Just one more piece? I know we have no right to ask, but, well, this might be a once-in-a-lifetime moment for everyone here." The woman looked out at the audience. She saw the hopeful faces. She saw the young music student who had studied her recordings. She saw the older gentleman whose wife had loved her work. She saw strangers who had become connected through a shared experience. And she made a decision. Why not? She said with a small smile, "The night is still young." The crowd cheered even louder. People rushed back to their seats, eager to get the best view. The room fell into an expectant hush, every eye fixed on the piano. She turned back to the keyboard and stretched her fingers gently. This time, she didn't start slow. She didn't test the waters. She knew this piano now. They had already introduced themselves. She began to play something different. Not classical this time. Instead, she launched into a rich, soulful jazz improvisation. Her fingers danced across the keys with playful energy, weaving complex rhythms and unexpected harmonies. It was joyful. It was alive. It was the kind of music that made you want to move, to smile, to feel every beat in your bones. People started swaying in their seats. A few couples got up and began dancing near the back of the room. The stuffy, formal atmosphere of the gala had completely disappeared, replaced by something warm and spontaneous and real. She played for another 20 minutes, moving seamlessly between styles. Jazz became blues. Blues became something softer, more romantic. She took the audience on a journey, lifting them up and bringing them down, making them laugh and cry and everything in between. And through it all, she was smiling. Not the polite, modest smile from before. A real smile. The smile of someone who had rediscovered something precious they thought they had lost. Music wasn't just her talent. It was her soul. And tonight she had shared it with a room full of strangers who would never forget this moment as long as they lived. When she finally stopped playing, the silence lasted only a heartbeat before the room exploded. The applause was deafening. Every single person in that ballroom rose to their feet. It wasn't coordinated. It wasn't planned. It just happened, naturally and spontaneously, like a wave that couldn't be stopped. Hundreds of people stood from their chairs, clapping so hard their palms stung. Cheering so loud the chandeliers seemed to shake. The woman remained seated at the piano for a moment, taking it all in. The sound washed over her like warm water. She had heard applause countless times in her life. She had performed in the greatest concert halls in the world for audiences of thousands. But somehow, This felt different. This felt special, Dot. Maybe it was because she hadn't expected it. Maybe it was because these people had no idea who she was when she sat down. They hadn't bought tickets to see a famous pianist. They hadn't come with expectations or preconceived notions. They had simply listened with open hearts. And that made their response feel pure, honest. Real. She stood slowly and gave a small, graceful bow. The applause grew even louder. People were whistling. Some were shouting, "Bravo!" A few were openly crying, not bothering to hide their tears. The event coordinator rushed onto the stage, her face glowing with joy. She grabbed the microphone and tried to speak, but her voice cracked with emotion on the first word. She laughed at herself, wiped her eyes, and tried again. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I think it's safe to say that none of us will ever forget this evening. What we just witnessed was, well, there are no words. Pure magic." The crowd cheered in agreement. "I also have some incredible news," the coordinator continued. "During that last performance, our silent auction officially closed. And I am thrilled to announce that tonight's event has raised over $400,000 for the Children's Hospital." Gasps of surprise and delight rippled through the room. That number was almost double what they had raised the previous year. People exchanged looks of amazement and started clapping all over again. "And I have a feeling," the coordinator added with a knowing smile, "that a certain unexpected performance had something to do with that generosity." She turned to the woman standing beside the piano and extended her hand. "Thank you. From the bottom of our hearts. Thank you for turning an ordinary evening into something extraordinary." The woman took her hand and squeezed it gently. "The honor was mine, truly." As she stepped down from the stage, something remarkable happened. Instead of rushing toward her or surrounding her with demands for photos, the crowd parted respectfully, creating a path for her to walk through. People reached out to touch her hand briefly, to whisper words of thanks, to simply be near her for a moment. But nobody pushed. Nobody grabbed. There was a sense of reverence in the air, a collective understanding that they had witnessed something rare and precious. The socialite in the red dress stood near the edge of the path. When the woman passed by, their eyes met briefly. The socialite opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. Her face was flushed with shame. The older woman stopped and looked at her kindly. There was no anger in her eyes, no resentment, just warmth. "Thank you," she said softly. The socialite blinked in confusion. "Thank me? For what? I practically bullied you into playing. I was so rude. I'm so embarrassed." The woman smiled gently. "You pushed me onto that stage, and I needed that push. I had forgotten how much I missed performing, how much I missed connecting with people through music. So yes, thank you. Sometimes the universe uses unexpected messengers." The socialite's eyes filled with tears. She didn't know what to say. She simply nodded, overwhelmed by the grace this woman was showing her. The older woman continued walking through the crowd. Near the back of the room, she spotted the young waiter who had asked her if she played. He was standing frozen, still holding his tray, looking at her with wide eyes. She stopped in front of him and smiled. "Still think I should learn to play?" He laughed nervously, shaking his head in disbelief. "Ma'am, I had no idea. When you said you dabbled, I thought, I don't know what I thought." "Not this. We all dabble in something," she said with a wink. "Some of us have just been dabbling a little longer than others." He laughed again, genuinely this time. "I'm going to tell my kids about this someday. The night I served water to a world-famous pianist and had no clue." "Make sure to tell them the good parts," she replied. "Leave out the part where I asked for extra lemon." They both laughed, and she continued on her way. Near the exit, a woman was waiting for her. She was about the same age, dressed elegantly, with kind eyes that sparkled with tears. It was the old friend who had invited her, the one who had been stuck in traffic from the airport. She had finally arrived, just in time to catch the end of the performance. The two women looked at each other for a long moment. Then they embraced, holding each other tightly like sisters reuniting after years apart. "I saw everything," her friend whispered. "I came in right when you started the jazz piece. I couldn't believe my eyes." "Neither could anyone else," the woman replied with a soft laugh. Her friend pulled back and looked at her with admiration and love. "You told me you just wanted to eat cake and people watch. You told me you were done with performing." "I thought I was," she admitted. But apparently, the music had other plans. They walked out of the ballroom together, arm in arm, leaving behind a room full of people who were still buzzing with excitement. The gala continued for another hour, but the energy never faded. Strangers talked to each other like old friends. Business cards were exchanged, but so were genuine conversations. The walls that usually divided people at events like this had crumbled, at least for one night. Later, stories about that evening spread far and wide. People posted about it on social media. Local news picked it up. A video that someone had secretly recorded during the jazz performance went viral, viewed by millions around the world. Headlines called it, "The night a legend reminded us all to never judge a book by its cover." But for the woman herself, the fame didn't matter. The headlines didn't matter. What mattered was the feeling she had rediscovered sitting at that piano. The feeling of being alive, of being connected, of sharing something beautiful with other human beings. A few weeks later, she announced that she would be returning to the concert stage for a small series of performances. Not in giant arenas or famous halls. Just intimate venues, small crowds, the kind of settings where she could see people's faces and feel their energy. The tickets sold out within minutes dot, and every night before she played, she would think about that charity gala. She would think about the young waiter, the embarrassed socialite, the grieving widower, the hopeful music student. She would think about how a room full of strangers had become a community, bound together by the simple power of music. She had spent years believing her best performances were behind her. She had convinced herself that her time in the spotlight was over. But that night taught her something important. It's never too late to share your gifts with the world. It's never too late to surprise people, including yourself. And sometimes the most extraordinary moments happen when you least expect them. In places where nobody knows your name. All you have to do is sit down, take a breath, and play. Because true greatness doesn't need a stage. It doesn't need an introduction. It doesn't need permission. It just needs the courage to show up. And let the music speak for itself.